All right, good evening. Welcome to the regular board meeting of March 16th, 2023. It is now 6:09 p.m. and we have returned from closed session. During our regular board meeting tonight, there are many opportunities for the public to address the board, hearings, public comment, or during a specific agenda item. If you wish to speak to the board, please complete the online request to speak form or use the raise your hand feature online when the agenda item is reached. This will help me better manage the meeting. When it is your turn to speak, your microphone will be unmuted and you will have 3 minutes to speak before the microphone is muted. The Brown Act governs meetings of governmental bodies in California. Your comments to the board must be specific to the agenda item you are addressing. And if there is no specific item, you are welcome to present comments during public comment. The Brown Act permits public criticism of the district's policies, programs, and services and of board members' action. Constitutional First Amendment free speech rights permit the public to criticize employees' job performance. However, the board will not listen to personal attacks, name calling, or the ridiculing of employees. Please note that you are attending a public meeting of the Board of Trustees during the public's business and that this is not a public forum for public debate. Thank you. I will now pass the land acknowledgement to Member Pacheco.
Thank you. Thank you, President Hernandez. We acknowledge that the Oak Grove School District and our schools occupy the unceded territory of the Mohawk Ohlone Nation, the sovereign nation and original people of the skies, land, and waters, where we work and learn. The Mohawk Ohlone people are the stewards of these land and of the teaching and learning that comes from and responds to the needs of the land and people who share it. May our daily lives and work, research, teaching, community engagement support the evolving vision of Mohawk Ohlone for their community and these lands.
Thank you. Superintendent Monzo, will you please lead the flag salute? Thank you, Superintendent Monzo. I will now pass it to you again for the superintendent's report.
Thank you, President Hernandez, and welcome everyone. I'd like to start by mentioning that this last weekend had an opportunity to participate in the Dream Keepers Award. I want to thank all of the allied administrators and many other administrators and staff that put together the 19th annual Dream Keepers Award, which was a great success this last Saturday. I want to thank the many parents and students who participated in last Saturday's event, in particular, Mr. Sean Gardier, a Del Roble parent from Tweeby. We have some Tweeby teachers here today. As well as Michael Gonzalez, one of our transportation staff who also helped to present the awards during Saturday's event. And Mr. Gonzalez also has a connection with one of our trustees here as well. So he did a wonderful job in recognizing our students during the event. This event, we're organized to recognize 3rd, 6th, and 8th grade African-American students and their successes in a variety of areas. At this event, we also recognize one of the originators of the Dream Keepers Award, Miss Amelia Hill, who, as you may know, recently retired last month. And also want to thank our keynote speaker, Mr. Tyson Amir, who did the keynote for the event. We know that over the last few weeks, we've been hit with atmospheric rivers, storms. It was nice to see the sun over the last couple of days. Last week, we had a group of 6th grade students from Indigo Frost and Edenvale at Science Camp. And because of the expected rain and potential impact to the Santa Cruz Mountains, we decided to bring the students home on Thursday evening instead of Friday morning. It was a good thing we did because the next day, some of that area was actually mandated to evacuate in some regions as well. So, but I want to thank our transportation department, Ms. Van Nguyen, Gabe Altamirano, our chief facilities officer, Mark Evans, as well, who coordinated efforts to make sure that our buses were able to go to the camp and bring all of our students home safely and our staff home safely as well. So the students, even though they missed a little smidgen of their experience, were able to have the majority of their experience in science camp, which was good. And so, but you know, priority was to make sure that they were able to come back home safely. We started the LCAP process. The LCAP, as you know, is the school district's tool for setting goals, plan actions, and then also leverage resources to meet the goals to improve student outcomes. And so the LCAP does require school districts to gather input from students, from teachers, classified staff, parents, community, to determine the goals and actions for the budget priorities for the subsequent school year for the district. So we've been able to meet with some of our groups. We've met with our district advisory council, with homeschool club presidents, and also with my favorite meeting and group, which is our student advisory council, which are the representatives from each of our schools that come once a month to meet with me. And so no offense to adults, but you know, being with kids is the absolute best. And so that they're just fantastic and really great perspective around feedback and interest that from their perspective, what we need as part of priorities for our schools. So we'll continue that process through April 7th, I believe is when the survey window closes. And so we encourage all of our staff and we encourage our staff to encourage all of their parents to take the survey and provide feedback as we have all of those areas of feedback read by our ESD division, Ms. Bowles and her team, to identify priorities for the subsequent year and where we can make adjustments and modifications to our actions and services and our resources as well. And so I want to thank Ms. Bowles, her entire team in ESD that have been working and will continue to work all the way through June through 2 meetings where they present the draft LCAP plan and then ultimately the second meeting in June where it will be for the board's consideration and action. Our executive team has had an opportunity to visit a number of sites. We've visited Davis, Del Roble, Tweeby program in Del Roble, and Sakamoto as well. In addition to that, I've been able to also visit Baldwin, Herman, Oak Ridge, and Stipe. Again, it's really great to be able to see the great work that all of our teachers and our students are engaged in active learning and participation with the content and curriculum in all of our classrooms. And I also want to highlight one of our visits was also with Dr. Tanya Jaco, who joined, or I joined Ms. Dr. Jaco and a visit to Davis Intermediate School. So appreciate the time. I know staff appreciated the time in visiting the campus and being present for that visit. And lastly, just yesterday, Tuesday, I'm sorry, we had the Future Chefs Challenge. And it was our version of Chopped, or our version of Master Chef, or heaven forbid, no Hell's Kitchen. But we had representatives from across the district. We had 10 students from various schools come together at Herman Intermediate School to participate in a chef's challenge. And I was really working hard to put up a good face when I got home and look at my wife's dinner. Because I tried everything and they were so good. So I want to thank our CNS staff, not just our director, but a number of our CNS staff from our schools who volunteered beyond their school day to help out for this event. It was a wonderful event. We had a lot of our parents there in support of our students who just really created some really delicious dishes for everybody to taste. And so we'll be highlighting in our next weekly communication that activity with some pictures and also the representatives from each of the schools across the district and the winners as well. And so, but I'd like to recognize that our first place winner was Jackson Hill from Del Roble at Tweeby. And second place winner was Zoe Warp from Oak Ridge. And third place was for Brooke Rip from Frost Elementary. And as as was mentioned during the event, all of the students were great and they were all winners, and it was just a really fun event. And so I want to thank our CNS staff, our Terry Anaya, who oversees the department, and also Karis Judicia from Sodexo, and again, all of the support staff that helped in making this event possible. So with that concludes my report.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, Superintendent Manzo. Those really sounded like some amazing events. And again, just thank you for the quick action too to evacuate our students and move them from the Santa Cruz region, during those storms last week. So I'm very happy everyone's safe and there was no incidents. And I also hope everyone watching and everyone here has been able to maintain safety during these storms as well. So thank you again. That does bring us to our closed session report. And so tonight, the board did meet in closed session, and that was to discuss public employee performance evaluation of the superintendent, and no action was taken. Public employee discipline release dismissal, government code section 54957, and no action was taken. And the last item, student discipline case number 22/23. And I apologize earlier, I said the wrong year, but it is case number 22/23-03. And the board did take action on this item. So the Board of Trustees expels pupil 22/23-03 through March 16th, 2024, based upon successful completion and documentation of completion of all rehabilitation requirements. Pupil 22/23-03 may petition the Oak Grove School District or subsequent school district for reinstatement at a comprehensive public school. And that was with 4 unanimous ayes and with 1 absent today. So at this time, that does conclude the closed session report, which leads us to our first public comment of the night, 4.1. Wade and Shayla. And so I'll go ahead and take Wade first, and then we'll be able to move on to Shayla. Okay. And then there's 3 minutes for both of you.
Awesome. Thank you so much to the board for giving us this time. My name is Wade and this is Shayla. Our student is enrolled in the Baldwin Preschool Extended Program. We were disappointed to hear about Oak Grove's decision to reduce the hours of Baldwin Preschool Program. It's difficult for me and my family. The lack of communication and transparency with families has been extremely frustrating and unacceptable. In a meeting yesterday, families were made aware for the first time that the district has decided a month ago to reduce hours
In January.
in January. And even mentioned that they were thinking about cutting the program altogether without letting us know. Enrollment was yesterday, the same day that we had a meeting about reducing hours. Families are scrambling to make plans for their students' future and childcare. Preschool is a valuable foundation to student success. The preschool program with after-school care allows my student to have accessibility to special services that would not be provided to them if they were not in this program. Without after-school care, working families will not be treated to the same opportunities and preparation for TK. We were told yesterday that the preschool program's funding is being reallocated to fund TK, which is a fully state-funded program. If the school is using preschool funds to fund TK, then the board has the right to discuss and make decisions about the programs being cut. We were told not to come tonight to our meeting yesterday because of this. We were told it was not a board decision. We would like the board to be aware of the information provided to us, and we would like the board to discuss keeping the preschool extended hours program available to families, district employees, and the students of the program. Hopefully, the board will be able to be more transparent with families about the program's future. This program is a much needed opportunity that has a history of wait lists and full enrollment. The community needs these programs now more than ever. We were only made aware of these changes 3 days before enrollment. The community trusts in Oak Grove and the board to, quote, ensure every child's potential is achieved, end quote. Why would the district then move to limit opportunities for students' long-term achievement? Extended day preschool is too important of an opportunity to so many families in this district for the board to not publicly discuss and communicate the decision. We're disappointed by the lack of communication, and we would like the opportunity to understand from you all what it is that you guys had planned to do with this program and supporting all students. The most vulnerable students are the ones at risk here. They don't have these opportunities elsewhere, and we just like your opportunity to at least listen to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Becky.
Hello, my name is Becky Kimmer. I work in our district as a preschool special educator. I also own a home in our district, and my 4th grade son has attended school in our district since preschool. It is safe to say that I'm fully immersed in the Oak Grove School District as a district employee, parent, and active member in our community. Last week, I was also extremely disappointed to hear that the Baldwin fee-based private preschool was changing their hours. I found out about this change exactly 1 week before I planned to register my daughter for next school year. As you can imagine, I have many concerns. Originally, this program was opened in part to help generate money for our school district. By cutting the hours, I guarantee you are chasing away many potential families, as well as revenue our district so desperately needs. As part of my job, I have personally recommended many families to your program. This will no longer be an option for the families I serve. I also regularly conduct observations of students in many local private preschools. It is safe to say that the quality of early childhood education is lacking in our area. Not to mention the price is outrageous for my own teacher salary. Years ago, the Baldwin program extended its hours in part for district employees and teachers to have an option for affordable childcare within the district. I do not know any teachers that can pick up their children by 3, as our workday is not complete. It's never really complete, but it's not complete by 3. My classroom is literally next door to this program, and now it feels so out of reach because it is not a viable option for my family. After school care for preschool age students is not available in our district. And even if it were, there's no way I can afford to pay for after school care for a program I'm already paying for. My oldest son attended the Baldwin program for 2 years, and it is an understatement for me to say it is simply amazing. It is truly a hidden gem. I have been talking to my daughter about her attending preschool next year with the same wonderful teachers that my son has, or that her brother had. Now, unfortunately, I may have to tell her that she cannot attend preschool because mommy has to work. Please consider making some changes to next year's program hours to accommodate district employees, as well as working families in our community who all deserve affordable, quality, early childhood education. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any virtual public comments?
There are no virtual comments.
Okay. Seeing none in person, that does conclude item 4.1 public comment, which brings us to item 4.2 bargaining unit comment. President Berlin. Thank you.
Good evening. Mari Paz Berlin, President of the Oak Grove Educators Association. It's nice to see everybody, and everybody survived the rain. So hopefully, I know there were some power outages, and in Santa Cruz, it's amazing that roads can just be taken out, but hopefully everybody is okay. I'm just reminded of that the fact that we should have some, I think I've talked to Assistant Superintendent Chidas about this also, that there should be some provisions that we explore and talk about where if members do get stuck, there were some people stuck in Soquel where a road went out, a river overflowed, and they didn't have access to the road, they didn't have access to go to work, they didn't have access to a grocery store, and power was out. So I think there needs to be some exploration of having some provisions where staff can take the days that they need to take their things in order, get their things in order, and not have it come out of their sick leave, because those are extraordinary circumstances. And it's a nod to our families that we care about you. It demonstrates to them that you do not have to use your sick days in order to take care of yourself and your family and make sure everybody is safe. So I'm glad everybody here has made it. And hopefully California will not, disappear. So just a few updates. We are continuing with our education of our members of community schools. We did hold a virtual event, and then our next action is we'll be holding an in-person event at Christopher School in the library. So thank you, Jose, for collaborating with me and helping make that happen. We appreciate it. So right now it is for our certificated OGA members, but there will be a time where we will invite the board to come to an in-person event also, so you can be a part of it. Right now, our focus has been educating our members, letting them know what this is about and how the transformation can really benefit the whole community, and all the different possibilities of what that can look like in Oak Grove. So moving on to special ed, we'll be holding our last dinner for our SPED teachers next week on Wednesday. And then just a reminder, we use those opportunities to talk to our members in the particular groups, to talk to them about what are some things that are working about their work, what are some things that need some revisions or some possible revamping or reworking. Always trying to find out what can we do to help change things. And it's also an opportunity for us to connect with our different groups. Currently, we do have some concerns that I wanted to share with you, and possibly you may already know about these. Our SDC preschool students, we currently have a list that our SPED department has. And when they are assessed, they can either, if they qualify and they have the marks that they qualify, then they can attend our SDC preschools. And then sometimes they present with other behaviors, and so they are referred to the county programs. Currently, we are being told that the county programs are full for our preschoolers. And they're not qualifying for our programs yet here. So there's about 8 that are on that wait list for us. It's our personal wait list. And they're kind of in an education limbo. So we have reached out to members of the County Board of Ed to share with them some information and also to see if they can help us in any way. One of our members, a psychologist, met with me and with 2 of the members there. And so there's more follow-up work needed. I know it's our responsibility as a school district to provide FAPE. And right now, we're really feeling for the students who are kind of caught in between us and county programs. So there has to be some way in the interim, because this has happened before, we have referred students to the county programs. And when there has been the space, they were able to take them. Right now, there isn't any space. So in the interim, we need to come up with a different solution so that all of our students in our community can get what they need. And that was the objective for us in reaching out to our County Board of Ed folks. I want to share that with you so that there's more people thinking about this, and possibly you have some connections as well. Maybe we could all, have some kind of larger discussion about how to do this better. I did share also with them that there are other particular issues that we need to work on in special education, but this was the main focus there is the number of students that are on the wait list. And what is worrisome is that those will not be the last students that will be on that wait list. And so what's going to be our next move to make sure that they get what they need? So I wanted to put that on your radar. Psychologists, that's next on the list. So we did have a meeting today with Assistant Superintendent Chaidez and with our SPED Director, Luciana Parks, in regards to psychologists and caseloads. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with our contract, but we have some language in there. It's limited language in regards to the recommended caseload amount. And so it's about 500 to 700 to one psychologist. That's the ratio. In the meeting, we did have a productive outcome. We came up with some possible solutions to offset some of the work that is put on our psychologists. I think as a district, we do need to examine the overall picture in special education. And so before I get out of that conversation, so during the meeting, we did come up with some different solutions and possible funding options. And it's an unfinished kind of conversation. So psychologists have been cut, then we've been added, and then they get cut again. It's a kind of a teetering situation. It's difficult to stabilize the special ed work in Oak Grove if there's constantly changing staffing in SPED. So I think it's overall for you to know, to think about what does special education look like in Oak Grove? What are the priorities in helping to stabilize special ed in Oak Grove? That includes staffing. Currently, we have high turnover in our SLPs and psychologists. For the last at least 5 years, we've had SLPs, speech language pathologists, And then that number has shrunk. And then during, I think last year, we had 6 that were virtual. That's very hard to do, to give services virtually to students who need speech. And I know Assistant Superintendent Bowles, and that goal was to reduce that and to keep reducing that. I think that's one area to attack that. But we also have to go at it from other directions too. What are some other ways that we could attract and retain SPED or special SLPs and psychologists in Oak Grove so that we keep them here? Are we doing what we can to retain them? And what does that look like? It includes PDs, trainings, looking at the workload, looking at the class sizes of our SDC classes, looking at the leadership that's in SPED. Just as an example, we've had 3 directors in the last 5 years. I'm hoping we can stabilize that. That's hard. That's very difficult. We've had at least 3 program coordinators in the same number of years. You're trying to stabilize a program and your leaders keep changing. It's hard. You know, we've had Jose as an example. He's been here for a while and he's gotten to know the lay of the land and kind of has seen the ebb and flow of what our district can look like from year to year. You don't have that kind of experience or history to be able to problem solve, brainstorm, get to know and develop really solid relationships, have roots in SPED. So I'm hoping that the folks that we have in there now are going to stay. But then that's the easy part, right? Hiring them. How do we keep them here? That's the hard part. That's more work. So it's easy to say you're hired, you're starting tomorrow, but how do we keep them? So I'm really hoping that really begins to stabilize, because that's a worry. I don't want to see more changes, because if we have changes at the top, that can't be good, you know. So, and just another issue to put on your plate, because I know Mark will be doing some presentations on second interim and all of that. But this year, due to one-time funds, there are some folks like our BCBAs, our board certified behavior analysts, and our registered behavior technicians, who were hired by one-time funds to help support and analyze and provide support for our students. Those are not our regular employees. Those are contracted employees, but in some districts, those are regular employees. And so the thing about one-time funds is that it's great when we have them and we can use them. And it upsets me that the state thinks that we're okay with one-time funds and then, you know, take it away, then that means those services and programs go away too. So I think as you're having the discussion, or when you have the discussion, to really question what are the priorities that we're trying to do, what's the outcome that we want a year from now, 2 years, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and what are the actions that we can take now that can achieve those outcomes for our students. So the LCAP, we were happy to have Assistant Superintendent Bowles to our rep council. We didn't ambush her. We were we were very kind, and we were very happy when she presented the LCAP and went through all the different goals. It was actually my first time as president, and that we had an in-person rep council. And so it was momentous on many occasions, or for many reasons. So thank you for sharing your time and your energy and your enthusiasm with us last night. We are doubling our efforts to get more participation in the LCAP. We know that is tied to what we spend money on. And maybe y'all have heard this quote from James Frick: "Don't tell me where your priorities are, show me where you spend your money, and I'll tell you what they are." So I think that's important to remember is if somebody can just look at where we spend our money in Oak Grove and they'll tell us what our values are, right? So additionally, for 23-24, we're interested in collaborating in some kind of subcommittee to explore more ways that can make the LCAP more accessible to everyone, especially some of our families who may need some assistance with either accessing a computer or even after they look at the LCAP, understanding what that, what are some of these questions like in terms of rating them. So we would like to participate in doing that earlier in the year. Sometimes March just kind of comes on us and it's like, oh, it's LCAP time. It's too late to do that. So if we can start it next week, that'd be great. No, I'm just kidding. That concludes my report.
Thank you so much, President Berlin, for sharing. That does conclude item 4, public comment, which brings us to our consent agenda. Superintendent Monso, if you can please present.
Yes, I'd like to recommend the board approve the consent agenda as presented.
Is there any public comment at this time regarding consent agenda?
There is no virtual comment.
Seeing none in person, trustees, any comments? Questions? All right, I open the floor for a motion.
Move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second that motion.
Okay, roll call, please.
Member Jaco,
Aye.
Member Pacheco.
Aye.
Member Gonzalez,
Aye.
President Hernandez,
Aye.
motion carries.
Thank you. That concludes item 5, consent agenda, bringing us to our first action item of the night, the second interim report. Superintendent Monso, if you want to open this up.
Yeah, thank you, President Hernandez. As mentioned earlier by President Berlin, we have our second interim report that it will be presented tonight. First of all, I just want to thank our entire business division who has been working on all of the legal and state requirements to complete this task and be able to submit it with the state and the county. It's rather a tedious and technical process to submit, which you have to go through a process where you absolutely receive no errors as you are doing all the calculations and including all of the required elements of building the reports. And so just an opportunity to thank our business division and all the folks that took part of that. And of course, our Associate Superintendent Evans, who leads that charge as well. And so with that, I'll have Mr. Evans present the second interim report.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you for the kudos to the business department. They do work hard on that, and it takes a lot to get all the numbers aligned. My presentation tonight will compare where we were at first interim to where we are at second, and then kind of looking down the road at our multi-year projection. You'll find that the format will be pretty similar. On the budget update, I tried to spiral it from last time so it looks familiar and isn't a whole lot of new information, but updated information on our assumptions and the most recent numbers based on those assumptions. Kind of second interim is kind of a defensive driving course. It's like looking at the gauges where we are now and then using the multi-year projections to kind of look down the road a bit and see what traffic looks like in the years ahead. So we'll update the dartboard assumptions, which is where we get a lot of our guidelines for how to project what's coming down the road. I'll go over those changes that we see from first interim to second interim, and then we'll look at that multi-year projection as we go out to 23 and 24 and beyond. So some of the assumptions that we have.
Mr. Evans, if you can just hold
Sure.
just 1 second, so we make sure that our public has an opportunity to see and also hear and at home, whoever might be joining us, just 1 second. Do you have a filler activity, anybody? No? We all know what those are, right? Oh, at home, they're able to see. That's good. Yeah, but our board can't see it. And our public can't see it.
Not Word.
All right, I think we're good.
All right.
Are we on the right page?
Yep, looks like we're on the assumptions page, so
Oh.
we're good to go. Thank you for your help with that, Mr. Kasim. So on the assumptions, looking ahead, our demographic reports, and we'll have an update on that next month, shows a continuing decline in enrollment. In the COLA, the cost of living allowance, and how we project for the future on that front. We use the school services dashboard and the fiscal crisis and management assistance team and the county's guidelines. Those are kind of our bellwethers for determining what that percentage of increase would be year to year. The 3-year rolling average for unduplicated pupil count. Unduplicated pupil count, again, our free and reduced lunch students, our EL students, and our foster youth. That increased from 40% to 43.75%. We had a really strong drive, as I mentioned previously, on our free and reduced lunch applications as the year began, and that came out strong. So that was a contributing factor to that increase in the unduplicated pupil count. That determines what type of supplemental funds we get in our local control funding formula for addressing the needs of those students. We're also realizing there are no more trends towards the state assisting with pension increases. Currently, STRS, the teacher's retirement, has plateaued at 19.1%, but the PERS, which is for our classified, continues to increase year over year. And then also we've, as President Berlin mentioned, we've had a great deal of one-time funds, both with COVID, both with very healthy budgets, but we don't see those on the horizon either. So there are no assumptions of any one-time dollars coming to the district in the year ahead. Yes. Correct. Yes. So some of the planning factors, again, the COLAs, as you can see, very healthy COLAs, and with the governor's proposal that came out in January regarding the 23-24 budget, he proposed an 8.13% cost of living allowance, which is a nice healthy increase. And even the out years running at 4% and 3% are at or above average over time. So our planning COLAs, as you see below, are the 8.13% and the 4.02 and 3.31. The 22-23 had a healthy COLA as well. We had the 6.56, and then there was an additional 6.7 added to that as the budget came to closure in June. So what that does is it carries through our per pupil funding, and we get a per pupil allotment for each grade span, kindergarten through third, 4 through 6, 7, 8, and then the high school is there as well. And to kind of just walk through this quickly for everyone, the top row is what we had in 22-23, and then the calculation of that 8.13% increase adds $745. So for each kindergarten to third grader, we'd get just shy of $10,000. Because of class size reduction, there's an additional 10% or 10.4% to be precise, added onto that allotment. So the grade span adjustment is a little over $1,000 and brings us up close to $11,000 for those students. And the similar model for determining the funding per pupil for 4, 6, and 7, 8. This is baseline. It's for every pupil. The supplemental is an addition to this. Any questions? And then these are just kind of economic factors we look at here. The California CPI is different than the COLA. It's a different number. It typically tends to run higher than the COLA. In this case, in the years ahead, our COLA is running ahead of the California CPI, which will be favorable for the district. And then down about 2/3 of the way down, you'll see the CalSTRS employer rate and the CalPERS employer rate. And as I mentioned before, the STRS is maintaining a flat rate of 19.1 in the years ahead. That can change. It can only change 1% up or down each year, but there's no projection for that. But the CalPERS is consistently going up and approaching 30% in the years ahead. So then looking at the revenue side of the house, all right, some of the assumptions there, the declining enrollment, assuming 150 students per year that we are losing in enrollment. Average daily attendance. We talked a little bit about this at first interim. Historically, our average daily attendance is at about a 96%. We've been tracking this year at about 93.3, so we are making our assumptions based on that. But we'll monitor that as we come up and close the school year. I know Assistant Superintendent Bowles has said our chronic absenteeism has declined, and so those things might be factors that improve that number over time. So we'll be watching that and make any adjustments when we start preparing budget for June. And then there's that kind of correlation of the financial impact. And as previously mentioned, there's also the instructional impact. We know that attendance has a direct correlation to student achievement. And actually, when you have the student attendance, you reduce the demand for services because students are achieving more. So it's a multi-beneficial technique if we can bring our attendance rate up. So we'll keep working on that. I know the school sites have been addressing that, as has ed services in general.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. You said that chronic absenteeism has declined.
Yeah.
And then I just was curious what that number has declined from what to what.
The mid-year data that we pulled around January showed us that at that time of the year at 17% chronic absenteeism rate. You may recall the dashboard, the rate that was we received for the entirety of the 21-22 school year was just about 29% or a little over 29%. So we're hoping that that trend increases. Sometimes we still see some dips in the springtime for various factors, but at least in January, we saw that that was down to 17%. Still not to the 9% prior to COVID, but a significant decrease from 21-22.
So here on the revenue side of the house, the first interim and the second interim there are side by side in the first couple columns. And you'll see there's really very little shift in the revenues, a slight increase in the LCFF, the primary state resources, a very small increase in federal. Other state actually had a decrease, and this is based on the governor's proposal. One of the things that came up in the January proposal from the governor was to reduce the arts and music grant by 1/3. So we've taken that into account, assuming that becomes a reality. So that would drop our one-time dollars by about $1.8 million. And then other local remains pretty constant. So overall, the revenues have a decrease for the year. That's largely because we're going on the assumption that that arts and music grant will be reduced. We'll have to see legislation for that. We haven't seen it yet, so we may not have that hit in the end, but just being prepared. Looking ahead, going down the road for a little bit, looking at the lanes ahead of us, you can see that the LCFF revenue goes up, but just a touch, which doesn't correlate with a significant COLA of 8.13%. So that's the dual impact of a healthy COLA, but a declining enrollment, declining ADA. So while we're getting more per student, we have fewer students that are being funded. So we get a relatively small increase in total number, but a percentage-wise per student has gone up. And then on the federal and state revenues, you'll see significant reductions. And as President Berlin mentioned, the end of one-time funds, that's what you see in 23-24 for both the federal and the state funds, the one-time monies no longer being allocated. And the other local will drop as well. There's a factor in other local called the redevelopment agency. They're property taxes that we often get, but we aren't guaranteed and we never know what they'll be, so we don't presume them until they arrive. Last year, it was about $2 million. We haven't budgeted anything for that this year because we don't know what that will be or if that will be. And then as you go further down the projected budget for 24, 25, again, going with the analogy of just looking a little further down the road, revenues actually decline. And again, that's a result of ADA. And then the 25, 26 school year is in yellow because that is actually not a required year for us to assess yet. It will be in June, but right now we have to look at this year and 2 years out. But as an initial step, we start looking at that next year out. Now, this is kind of Google Maps. It's so far down the road that whatever it says down there could be totally different by the time you arrive. But we look at that just to start putting things in context, as well as looking for trend lines. And so any questions on the revenue side? The visual form of it here, and the dark blue, the red, and the green are all the components of the local control funding formula. And actually in the year ahead, you'll see that will make up a larger portion of the pie because the other three have a lot of one-time dollars in them. So as those one-time dollars shrink from Fed and other state, there'll be a smaller proportion of the budget. That'll be true on both sides of the house when we look at expenditures as well. Then on the expense side of the house, you'll see that certificated is largely the same, but in our first interim, we had settled all of the negotiations for OGEA, and those didn't have much change. They're all of $1,000 difference. Classified and benefits you'll see change because this now represents the agreements we reached with AFSCME, with CSEA, and with AGMA. So those changes are reflective of the increased salaries in this year, as well as 23, 24, and 24, 25. Supplies, a slight decrease, services, an increase. A lot of those are one-time dollars that we found resources or contracting out services as needed. Capital outlay is generally flat. So a slight increase in overall expenditures from 149.5 to 152.3. And you'll see those fall off next year. And that's the decline of those one-time dollars, not using those one-time dollars in services. So while the salaries and benefits continue to trend and reflect the agreements that were reached for the next 3 years, you'll see the supplies drop off significantly and the services drop off significantly as well. Capital outlay also, we don't anticipate using ELOP, Expanded Learning Opportunities Program, for some improvements next year. So that will drop off, creating a reduction of about $10 million in expenditures. And that trend line continues. Salary is going the same, and natural inflation and all. We'll see the overall expenditures go up to 148 and then up to 149 in the years ahead. And one of the things to watch for, and it'll show better in another slide, is the rate of, or the lack of increase on the revenue side compared to the rate of increase on the expenditure side. And again, a visual here. Here the blue and the red and the green represent salaries and benefits. As is typical in most school districts, people, that's our business, so that tends to be the largest share of our budget. And then you'll see the expenditures this year for books and supplies and services, and those again next year will be a smaller percentage of the budget overall.
Assistant Superintendent Evans, when you showed us expected revenues versus expected expenditures for that year that we're not required to analyze yet, can you let us know that the expected revenues are less? I mean, would you say that the expected revenues are more difficult to predict versus the expected expenditures? Like, is the 149 million, is that a more predictable and sturdy number?
I would say yes, in my experience, because so many of those salaries and benefits are fixed costs that we can predict pretty efficiently as to what they will be. The revenues can change. Are we going to get the COLA funded as we expect? If Lately, that's been a more positive COLA, but I've also been through experiences where that was a less positive COLA or so. So the revenues are more challenging, they're more volatile, and they're not in our control. They really relate to the collection. This year, particularly, the state revenues are not coming in as projected last June when they laid out the budget. So I'm hopeful the 8.13% COLA holds, and we're using that as our assumption because that's what's been based currently. But if April ends up not being as big a collection as possible, and that actually this year will be challenging because they postponed the filing dates because of all of the storms and whatnot. So the state will have a hard time actually getting a hard number on what the revenues are because many of the filing dates, both at the federal and state level, have been extended beyond June.
And then my other question is, it just doesn't work really well. No, sorry. Like, use my teeth. Okay. Okay. My other question would be, in what scenario would the district be at risk of not receiving a positive certification in the event that, let's say, the COLA rate isn't what we would hope for, or what would that look like?
And I think we're solid for the next few years, but I think, and I'll go through the slides of the balance sheet and the ending fund balance components of the ending fund balance. And I think that'll kind of address that question there, is how do we keep ourselves solvent for the years ahead? Because we do have a challenge of deficit spending coming up because the revenues are flat and the expenditures are increasing. We have other resources, but those have a timeline like any savings account would that you could tap into.
Okay.
So here's kind of the short version where you can see the revenues and the expenditures kind of side by side. And it shows you the kind of flatness of the revenues in the out years and just the natural growth of expenditures that we all face just running a household, let alone a school district. So what happens then in 23, 24, let's go back to second interim. You can see this year we have very healthy revenues because of the one-time dollars. So there's a good deal of carry forward, almost $8.8 million, a surplus, which will go to our ending fund balance. That will help us get through in the years ahead. And when we have that $5 million deficit in 23, 24, that's out of balance between the revenues and expenditures, that carryover will help us balance that out. And we won't need to make a contribution. But you'll see in 24, 25, that deficit actually grows. And we can use some of those resources that we're carrying forward, but we're also going to have to transfer in funds from an outside source, our capital special reserve. And that problem continues on in the out year of 25, 26. So, well, one of the reasons we look at 25, 26 is to see how that pattern progresses. And we see that that's kind of systemic as we move forward. So those are things we'll have to address. As I mentioned, if the attendance continues to improve and we get a better rate of ADA, that helps offset some of that as well. If we get a better COLA or there are some one-time dollars, but if there aren't, we have to figure out how to balance those equations. And then one of the reasons I go over this slide, it gets get a little muddy and get into some details, but I think it's important to understand what money is accessible and how it's accessible. Restricted funds are designated for specific purposes. So when you look at our ending fund balance by the end of 22, 23, we'll have a very healthy $32 million in our ending fund balance, but 75% of that is restricted or assigned. That means it just can't be used for any purpose. It is designated dollars. On the other side of that equation, what's left is about $9.5 million that are not restricted. 3% of our budget, the 4.5 million, we are required to keep in reserve. So that's why you see the 9.5 separated out at the bottom there as the 4.5 million for the reserve and the 4 million remaining. And as we move into 23, 24, you start to see that we're spending down that restricted budget, but we're also spending down that very bottom line of 4 million. It drops down $1 million, and then it actually disappears in 24, 25, and 25, 26. So all of that is being picked up and covered by the contributions from the special fund.
I have a question for Superintendent Manso. When the school district, before I was elected in 2018, when the school district and when the board of trustees had to consolidate schools and regularly laid off workers. What was the fiscal situation like then for to have pushed the board to consider those types of actions to balance the budget?
During that time, we went through a period where the reduction in enrollment was fairly significant. We're talking in the 350s to 400 student range in terms of decline in enrollment. And so that over a consecutive number of years created dynamics where without transferring in from the special reserve, we would in the third year out, we were at a negative number. And so, when the board, as part of our discussion, looked at a qualified or negative certification, really it was a matter of how do we sustain our ability to make local decisions as a local entity, as a local board, as opposed to others, either the state or other parties that would come and make decisions for us in terms of our budget and what our priorities are and how we spend our resources. And so at that time, that severe drop in enrollment and the number of schools that we were operating led the board to then establish the committee that went through a process of considering consolidation of schools. The special reserve has been super significant in our ability as a district to have time to make adjustments over the course of 2-3 years that helped our fiscal outcomes. As an example, during that period of time, we were going through the consolidation shortly after. We also went through and renegotiated all of our lease agreements. And so by renegotiating all of our lease agreements, we were able to add to our budget over $1 million a year. So in a 3-year budget, that's $3 million. During that same time, we were able to buy out a lease for solar, a phase of our solar system that cost the district in general fund money or about $1 million a year as well. And so the special reserve allowed us time to finish and look for transactions that could improve our expenditure side and also our revenue side. And so that transition of buying out the solar lease, because it was the lease payments of $1 million for the district, that meant that our budget was improved also again on the expenditure side by $1 million. And so just those two actions added in a 3-year budget picture $6 million to our budget. It also allowed us to make adjustments and consider a early retirement incentive. And so part of that early retirement incentive at that time also gave us about $550,000 a year savings. So again, in over a course of a 3-year budget, that's another $1.5 million. And so, but those things take time. Those things don't happen overnight. And so, which is why the special reserve and having a fiscal tool that can continue to help us make transitions as we have been doing over the course of X number of years is so critical. The glider transaction is a great example of that. It affords us a tool, a financial tool that gives us time to make adjustments, that gives us time to see what is the state doing with the revenue side and what are things that we can do to help offset our expenditure side. A good example is later on our agenda. we have an item that will save our district $3.8 million on bus purchases through a grant program. And so again, those things take time in order to alleviate a $3.8 million expenditure that otherwise would have come out of general fund, right? And so without a financial tool to continue to afford us time to make adjustments, then the board would have to make really critical decisions, because with negative certification, as you mentioned, the board would have to take a resolution to the county that says, whatever the delta is for our budget, you would have to identify the actual reduction of those costs in order for our budget to be approved. And as you recall, prior to COVID in 2019, the board took action to reduce $6 million in year 2 during that budget cycle, and an additional $2 million in year 3. With the coming of COVID, actually afforded us additional time, because all of the one-time funds that came, there were $28 million of one-time funds that allowed us to carry a positive certification for our budget. At the same time, take care of expenditures that that we needed to provide in terms of services due to COVID, but also those dollars were actively in our budget. And so it's a long way of answering the question. I apologize, but I think it's important to create context to, the circumstance then and what really helped us make it through. And I want to make a clarification. We did not lay off any individuals when we closed schools. Teachers transferred to other schools, and our classified staff worked, and we were able to place all of our employees that were located at the schools that were closed. But we were able to do that because we had a financial tool that gave us time to make those adjustments.
So until we see the possibility of negative certification, then those types of tough decisions that the trustees had to make won't be things that we would really have to consider.
It's hard to predict what happens with our budget and everything else from the state perspective, right? That's kind of the thing that we have very little control in terms of those dynamics. But I think if there are bumps in the road, having a reserve or a financial tool to help us get through that, those difficult patches would be important. And so it's a safety net for us that gives us that opportunity to have stability. Stability is important, as President Berlin said, in multiple areas, in the staffing area, and also in our fiscal area. And so without those tools that can afford us the opportunity for that stability, then the risk is much higher.
And then seeing our ending balance and from like 10 million in, I guess, general fund flexibility to like more 5 million in 25-26, between that 16 to 11 with restricted and ending balance. Do you see a pattern of that, of what happened back then, possibly happening sometime soon, or are we nowhere near like that?
The one positive aspect that we're seeing, and again, it's not a trend yet, is that our decline in enrollment seems to be tapering off and flattening out. And so our actual projected enrollment compared to our actual enrollment was improved by, I believe, over 80 students. And so in other words, it didn't drop. We were expected to drop an additional 80 students that we didn't see happen. And so that's 1 year. It's not a trend yet, but we're hoping that as part of, we're hoping that trend continues, which then means that that offset in terms of the reduction in revenue would be less significant. The bigger that number is in terms of loss of revenue, the less challenging it is to offset some of those things. So it's very different to lose enrollment of 500 students, 400 students, and which represents about $4.5 to $5.5 million compared to 150 students that may be, 2 million. Right? And so, so those factors are important. So we can't say that that's a trend, but that's a very positive factor. The other factor that's important is our attendance. As mentioned earlier, 1% improvement is about $1 million in revenue. And so in a 3-year budget, again, that's $3 million. Right? And so we're at 93% where we were at 96. If we get back to our standard enrollment at 96, that means $3 million a year. That's $9 million in our budget, in a 3-year budget. And so we'll continue to work on those factors to make improvements to help us again with our stability.
I know we've had enough storm clouds. I don't mean to be another one, but and part of this exercise is looking and seeing how solvent we are and what we need to do to plan for it. As I mentioned on the revenue side, and as Superintendent Monzo did, the ADA is something we can work on, and we have a little more ability to improve that. Birth rates and enrollment are a little harder to oversee. But on the expenditure side also, as you can see, we're carrying a good deal in restricted funds. Are there ways we can optimize those to take pressure off the unrestricted funds? So those will be conversations we have as well. And if we bring down those restricted balances in allowable ways, that will mean we're drawing less off of the unrestricted balance. So we'll be good for the next 3 years. We'll be able to maintain that positive outlook, but I think it's good to see where the trajectories are and plan accordingly. No, as we come in with the funds from minor and glider, those will assist improve those capital reserves.
Yeah, but I think that does represent our entire Calero fund, correct, Melina? Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So then looking ahead, we will have the positive certification. We may get a warning on deficit spending. That's going to be a natural going forward because we need to supplement, but it's also a side effect of all the one-time funds. They didn't get spent in the year they were received. So as you spend them in the out years, you're spending more than you get that year. So that I'm not too concerned about. The April collections at a state level, I am a little more concerned about because that really does dictate where the state lands on school funding. And we'll watch that in the month ahead. And then we'll really keep an ear to the governor's May revise, which comes out May 10th usually, and just looking at the revenue trends, see if he keeps the COLA at 8.13%. And based on all of those facts, we'll come to you with the budget adoption and the LCAP in June. So, any other questions I can answer for you?
I want to thank Associate Superintendent Evans and Melina Nguyen, who is in the back, as well as Ruth Martin, who is back in the back of our room as well, that have really worked hard on preparing and supporting our Associate Superintendent for tonight.
Thank you. Great work.
Thank you so much again for the presentation. I know we're now wondering how we can get our ADA up. I know that's been a desire of the board, and I know I also for the exec team, and I know all our teachers and staff are working hard too to figure out ways how we can get our students back in classrooms, right, and motivated, and just tending to all the needs, right, that we saw after COVID. So I do. No, I speak for all of us that it's going to be a continued goal. It definitely represents a value of all of us. So Thank you again. At this time, I will now open the floor if there are any public comments regarding action item 6.1. I don't believe we got any in person. Are there any virtual public comments at this time?
There are none.
Any other questions or comments from trustees? Thank you, trustees. May I please have a first and second for a motion?
I move to approve the set 22-23 second interim report.
Second,
Thank you. We do have a first and a second. May I please have a roll call vote?
Member Jaco,
aye.
Member Pacheco,
Aye.
Vice President Gonzalez.
Aye.
President Hernandez,
Aye.
motion carries.
Thank you.
President Hernandez, just one last thing I want to mention, it's been difficult with COVID to implement some of the things that we've had done prior to COVID in terms of ADA recovery. And so we are restarting our Saturday academies again, which allows the district to recuperate ADA from students that have been previously absent by attending one of our Saturday academies. And so for every day that a student is absent, they can recoup that absence, and the district can recoup the funding for that absence by attending one of our Saturday academies. And so we're reinstituting, and now that things are continue to be at a more stable place, all of the state emergencies are lifted and so forth. And so that's one thing that we'll be implementing to help support our attendance, our ADA for the district as well.
And President Hernandez and Superintendent Monzo, I think maybe for an appropriate month by June, I'd really like to learn a little more about the targeted approach the district is taking to increase ADA. And by targeted, I mean any focused subgroups that perhaps may not be experiencing the rapid decrease in chronic absenteeism as other subgroups. I know that each subgroup has a different rate of decreasing. And so I just would like to, I know we've asked questions about this before, maybe a month or two ago.
I do remember, yes.
So I think maybe just learning a little bit more about what those, like getting an update on that would be
Right.
really nice for
Sure.
not only the public, but also the board.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And, that is an area of priority as part of our work with the county on differentiated assistance. And so we do have a task force that is working on doing a deep dive on the information, the data, and looking at root causes, and then ultimately looking for an action plan to help support the district make improvements in that area. Anything you'd like to add to that, Ms. Bowles?
Sure. Yes. Thank you. We do have a team of a variety of educational partners in the district participating with us in differentiated assistance. We just had our second meeting with the county office. So we've just completed the first two meetings where we did root cause analysis, fishbone diagrams. We just finished, all of us on the committee did empathy interviews. We're particularly looking at students with disabilities as their chronic absenteeism rate was so high. So we did empathy interviews with parents of students with disabilities, students with IEPs, IAs. I had the pleasure of interviewing some IAs over at Herman just to kind of get their perspectives as well. And then now we're launching into the time where we're going to start doing these short PDSAs, plan, PD, develop, S, strategize, A, action. So these little kind of inquiry cycles where we're going to choose a strategy, put that into effect. And we also have an attendance task force that was put together by our director, Oscar Ortiz, also attending conference on attendance. And so we're just trying to get as many resources as possible. We appreciate the time and differentiate assistance with other districts because we're not alone in trying to figure out how to increase, attendance this year. So we've, and then as Superintendent Monzo mentioned, another strategy is those 4 Saturday recovery days. And we've set a goal for every site to have 2. So we've determined lead teachers. It's also a great leader development, administrative development experience for teachers so that they can be in charge of those Saturdays, help with some of that organization, of course, getting paid for their time as well. But we have teacher leaders who are already set up. We're going to have an information meeting with them. And then we have other teachers signed up to teach the enrichment. And it's fun. We have a whole variety of different things. Intervention, of course, academically, but we also use it for other fun activities to engage in on Saturdays. So we will recoup some of that funding, but we'll continue to differentiate assistance as a year-long commitment. And then we have meetings in between the county office meetings where we're planning and strategizing on what to do next.
So we'll make sure to provide an update as it's going through that process with the board. So it certainly is on our radar. And so I think it's as we continue to evolve with the committee to a point where we have sufficient information in terms of action steps and where it's substantive to bring to the board, and then also an opportunity for the board to provide any additional feedback and input as well.
Do you think that would be probably April or March or April or May or what month?
I'm not sure if at that point, that's probably something that we'll probably need to put our heads together and think through, and we can certainly follow up and send the information once we have a better picture of what that is. Yeah.
I'll go. Discuss what that might look like. And we can still put it on. Even if it's a rough outline of what even are the expectations, right? Or the way this is organized, because I don't have experience working with the differentiated program. So even if it's just a rough overview of what that looks like in the community, I still think it would be beneficial to start that conversation. So by the end of this year, even if it's a very rough plan, and then just what that looks like for the year to come.
Yeah, and I think if it's and again, we may be able to have more substantive. I just don't know yet at this point.
Right.
So we need to probably think through that. But if it's something, we can certainly start with, defining the process and where we are in the stage of that process. And then, if we have more information as we get to that point, then of course we'll be happy to include that as part of that as well.
So that leads us to a second action item, item 6.2. And so Superintendent Monto, I'll have to see if
Okay.
any work to find with that.
Yeah, thank you, President Hernandez. What we'd like to do, similar to what we did last time, where there's a lot of similarities in terms of some of the items that are following. And what we'd like to do, similar to what we did at the last board meeting, is have a associate superintendent. It's Mr. Evans' show again. All of these items are for our business division. Explain each of these items in detail, have an opportunity for any public comment, any board comment or feedback, and work through the rest of the items. And then if the board is ready at that point, once we've completed all of the explanation for each of these items, to take a motion for sections 6.2, 6.8, if that is agreeable to board president and the board. Yeah. Okay. All right. Great.
Any questions?
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Okay.
All right. So I'll turn it over to the Mr. Evans show one more time.
All right, thank you. 6.2 is the electric vehicle bus grant funding amendment. Actually, this we received a year ago. But since then, as with so many things, the prices have gone up. So when we saw that the cost of the buses had gone up, Anwin asked for an increase in the grant. They gave us nearly $100,000 in additional grant funds. So this amendment is going to reflect that. There was always a contribution of about 20% of the cost of the buses from the district. So there will be a slight increase in the district contribution in proportion to that as well. So we will still be putting in about $700,000, but in the course of spending that $700,000, we're getting 3.4 million and 9 buses to purchase. So again, a help to the general fund, tapping into the resources that are available. So that's what that amendment is for 6.2. Any questions I can answer regarding that?
Just a clarification, just out of the seven, the district contribution. I know that there later on the agenda, there is a state transportation allocation, that's new allocation. And then also Fund 40, which is considered part of general fund with the state allocation. Can you explain a little bit about
Yeah.
that as well?
With the budget in 22-23, they finally adjusted the contributions to transportation. When LCFF passed about 10 years ago, the transportation was a categorical fund. They took the numbers that districts were receiving and basically folded it into LCFF as part of the add-ons to LCFF, but there was no COLA attached. So for the last 10 years or so, we've gotten 1.2 million in transportation funds with no adjustment for costs on our end. When they passed the budget in 22-23, they made a commitment to fund 60% of districts' transportation costs. We spend about $3 million plus this year. Last year was just over $3 million. Receiving 1.2 million was only about 40%. So we'll get about another $550,000 in transportation funds. That'll be a good source, since that money will be backdated for 21-22, to put lump sum towards that $700,000, and then the special reserve might be able to pick up the difference. So,
Thank you.
and in the same process, I kind of just explained 6.3 to you with the transportation plan, because part of the requirements for those new funds is to have a transportation plan submitted annually related to that. Yes.
Maybe I'm just, I hope I'm not missing anything when we're looking at the transportation plan. This is something that the board has to approve annually, right?
Correct.
So the board has approved something like this in previous years?
No, this is a new transportation plan that needs to be approved for these funds only.
Okay, because I was just trying to like,
Yeah,
am I
no.
missing something?
No.
Yeah,
Yes. As part of that new funding source that came with the budget in 22-23, they want by April 1st of each year a transportation plan.
So we didn't miss 10 years or 15
Yeah.
years of not approving a plan. No, we.
I thought I was like, I must be a horrible trustee. Okay,
No.
well, then, is this something that we would be expected to approve of for 23, 24?
Yeah, you'll probably see it about a year from now. We'll do it probably at the February or March meeting each year. So I'll work with Van Nguyen in putting this together, and Melina, as well as getting the latest costs and estimates of what that 60% would be.
Okay, thank you.
One of the nice adjustments also is that 60% does now have a COLA attached to it. So that will help us keep pace with things better than what we've had to deal with the last 10 years. So that's 6.3 on the transportation plan. 6.4 is a improvement around the district corporation yard, the maintenance yard behind the district office. We've had extensive break-ins. It happens to be an area where there are a lot of things stored that are of high interest, catalytic converters, copper, things like that. The fencing is old traditional chain link with what they call the 2-inch, the larger squares. We look to replace that with the 1-inch called the no climb. It's a tighter weave, and then we'll put a screen up there so people can't see into the maintenance yard and make things less visible, less attractive. Right now, because of the break-ins, it literally is, stitched together, glued together with pallets and things like that. So it's much in need of repair and replacement. So this contract is to take care of that work, and that'll work in conjunction with the cameras and all to help mitigate some of the theft and losses we've experienced.
Can we add a Doberman pincher,
Yeah, I don't think, I think they,
a Rottweiler?
yeah, that becomes an insurance issue, so. Another fencing issue, item 6.5, is fencing improvements at Taylor. When they did the streetscape and all, they wrapped around the front of the school, but on Woolsley's side, there is again old chain link fencing. It's 6 feet high along much of the area, but there's a parking lot and a county building on that street, and you can walk into their parking lot, and then it's only a 4-foot fence between there and the playground. So we're going to do this in 2 phases. This phase is to do the area around that county facility and parking lot, making the fence 7 feet against the playground and 6 feet along the street line. And then we have some summer work going on with the solar panels and some under solar modifications, and we'll do the rest of that fence along the street from that building down to the end of the property with a summer project. 6.6 leaves the facility side of the house, moves to the staff technology devices. Najib Kasimi here has been working on this, and basically after studies and estimates from vendors, they landed on the Lenovo for the new laptops, computer devices for staff. So this is the contract to purchase those. It actually will be a lease, but we're looking again at optimizing some one-time dollars and so if we don't go for the lease, we'll put some money down, maybe reduce the lease payments that take pressure off the general fund in the future years. So, but it's a $1.1 million. Yeah. And these tend to have about a 5-year lifespan.
So our staff, I believe it's been at least 4 years since they received the last refresh in the laptop. So it certainly is needed for our teachers to have the upgrade.
Item 6.7 is actually another grant opportunity we're taking advantage of. We actually already did this grant for our Title I schools. That was the first round that were eligible. This is for the other sites, and it relates to healthy air and plumbing and efficiency. So this is largely a grant to go through and assess all of our HVAC equipment and some of the plumbing and all as well. Find efficiencies that we can gather, do some repairs, not full replacement, but maybe some simple repairs, and improve those systems and optimize them. They'll give us some guidelines, and then we'll look for funds if there's some major repairs or replacement. Because so many of the schools had a lot of upgrades with the last bond and Measure S, I don't anticipate a whole lot of HVAC replacements, but there may be some older ones, and I know some schools still have older ones.
So this is, I think, another example of where we have an opportunity to perform a typical work that otherwise would have been borne by our general fund, and leveraging, in this case, state funding to do a thorough assessment so that we just spend those targeted funds for the needed areas based on the full assessment for each of our sites. And so, so again, I want to acknowledge our staff for seeking out these type of opportunities that one allows us to operate in a more efficient way, and then two, saves resources from our general fund and leverages what's out there and available to be able to support our overall fiscal picture as well. So thank you, Associate Superintendent Evans and staff for that.
And this is our maintenance team that takes the lead on that. So kudos to them. The last item, 6.8, is administrative acknowledgement and closing of the emergency repair declaration that we had back in December. That work has been completed. So this resolution recognizes that it's no longer in status. It's a closed project now.
All right. Any additional questions for Associate Superintendent Evans?
It's about transportation.
Mhm.
So, to be transparent, I'm just not a fan. I'm not planning on making any changes to the transportation plan. I don't even know if the board has that authority. But like in this instance, but it's hard for me to reflect on just having like the fact that this district doesn't have transportation flexibility for any students that are not unduplicated pupils. And so I know that previous boards were the ones who eliminated general transportation for general ed students. And how are we assessing the students who are experiencing chronic absenteeism and seeing if it's due to, if a contributive factor is due to transportation? And if it is, and if it's not something that we're actually analyzing or asking them about, then how do we look at our own transportation plan and see, ask ourselves, well, if we did expand at least to maybe certain sites or to certain students or have some type of flexibility beyond kids with IEPs, homeless or foster youth. How do we create a more flexibilities with that would help our ADA as well?
That would be a good thing in our process of talking about students who have routine absences and chronic absenteeism, to say, what is it? Is that part of the equation? That's certainly a valid question to ask. And for our unduplicated pupils, providing them, they tend to have the highest needs as a rule. So
Right.
that's why the priority of the limited funds are put there. And then special education is the other primary source of transportation dollars. School districts commonly had to cut back on transportation or limit routes or charge or fees, which can only be charged to some students, not all students, because all students don't have resources. So this is a problem that's across the state, and it's, even more so for some of those more rural districts, right, that have larger distances to travel. So fortunately for us, those districts actually really pushed for this change in legislation with the 22-23 budget. It would be nice as they move towards greener buses and all, that the state would maybe move towards funding transportation and reducing some of those kind of impacts on traffic and all as a rule. But the funding sources at this point, as I said, they're covering 60%. And we're already over another 40% that comes from the general fund rather than transportation dollars. So it becomes a challenge as to how to optimize those dollars. But I think we can certainly look at, are there students that we could service or somehow tie into routes that exist for other reasons that might serve a student? So those would be some maybe efficiencies we could find and improve services at that
I
route
think for
too.
me, I really would like to see data that confirms to us that our stance at restricting our transportation services to students with IEPs and foster and homeless youth, if there's data that can continue to show that that transportation needs are not contributing to ADA or chronic absenteeism, and that this is still a justifiable stance for the district, that's the kind of data I would like to see moving forward. And if there's, as that process is ongoing, if we can collect that data to help the board have confidence that this is the continued action forward, then I think that would make me feel a lot more comfortable just seeing this transportation plan get approved year by year. And by the way, when will be the next time this board approves another transportation plan? Because I know it's March for 22-23. Will the transportation plan for 23-24 be in June? And like, when will the board approve that one?
Probably going to be annually about this time. So
Okay.
that, and to that point, as we address that question and all, I think, and again, it would tie in closely to the conversation we're having with our chronic absenteeism. And we get that information, then we can start discussing if the data shows us specific information, how do we respond to that data?
Mhm.
What options do we have? And also, I think if we are looking at that, then next year, it's always going to be a lag, but we can then be looking at how do we adjust bus schedules and all
Mhm.
accordingly.
Other questions or comments, trustees? Okay. Any virtual public comments?
There are none.
Alrighty, and we are seeing none in person as well. So at this time, we will be able to make one motion for those items 6.2 through 6.8.
I move to adopt item 6.1 to 6.8 or
6.2.
6.2 to 6.8. Thank you.
I second that motion.
All right, so we have a first and a second. May I please have a roll call vote?
Member Jacob,
Aye.
Member Pacheco.
Aye.
Vice President Gonzalez,
Aye.
President Hernandez,
Aye.
motion carries.
Thank you so much. That does conclude our action items for the night, leading us to the closing items. At this time, board, does anybody wish to share?
I just want to say amazing work from everybody. And I'm so excited we're going to have an electric bus fleet. That is just incredible. And huge thanks to all of the staff who've been working really hard in collecting these fantastic resources from our local and statewide community and beyond. I'm really excited for the future of this district, especially as we look to create more sustainable, environmentally friendly modes of operation for our district. Thank you.
Yeah, I have had the opportunity now to visit Burnell and Davis and look forward to the some other site visits and engage with students. See some of the amazing educators and the admin that are there, and I really appreciate the thoughtfulness around from leadership around just a holistic approach, trying to be inclusive, taking restorative methods in responding to student behavior and student needs. And that's an ongoing, consistent dialogue. And also their just intentionality around building relationships with students. I think that that's really key and really important. And it is also very exciting to see, and to see how the district can grow, and how the community can grow. And also just being intentional in creating that space. I also just want to say how much I'm grateful and appreciative. My family experienced a loss, and I just, the amount of compassion and support, I just want to express my deepest gratitude on behalf of my family. I'm looking forward to how we can continue to build that community. And with that said, just, you know, we tend to work in silos, unfortunately, in education, where, you know, admin meets with students and admin meets with parents, teachers meet with parents, teachers meet with students, right? But I'm just curious and wondering how we can kind of come together to think through some of these issues like chronic absenteeism, right? And kind of collectively talk through those things together so that we're all hearing from one another at the same time, as we're trying to make decisions that are going to be in the best interest of the students and the educators that are here, and the families that are here in the district. So with that said, I'm looking forward to our work together, and what is going to come forth.
Thank you, Trustee Jacob, and we are sorry for your loss. We missed you at the last board meeting. Just thank you for just wonderful work tonight. It's really exciting to see grants on our action items. And so I'm just really looking forward to all the savviness of our exec team and all the people working behind the scenes to look for those grants and put forward some great initiatives for our students and our staff and families. So thank you.
Not much on my end. The safety committee did meet this month to go over safety and other items, such as different items that are coming into play with our funds that are coming in. And so it's really good to see the collaboration with teachers, parents, the board, and then our superintendent that attends. And then as well as see our superintendents that lead the meeting kind of go off of the feedback that they received from myself and parents and teachers in the last meeting, kind of follow into this one. So good work coming and happening with the safety committee.
Yeah, thank you. We are really looking forward to seeing what the safety committee brings forward. So at this time, we are ready to adjourn the meeting. So may I please have a motion and second to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? All right. So the regular board meeting on March 16th, 2023 is adjourned at 7:52 p.m. I hope everybody has a beautiful night.